We're doing this for your own good, Megan. That's what my mother said when she tore up the letter in front of me. The letter that held my job offer. My ticket out of that suffocating little town in North Carolina. The paper ripped in half before I could even breathe. And she tossed it in the trash like it was nothing. Before we get into how everything fell apart, and how I turned the tables, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support keeps me telling stories like this. I was 26 when I realized my family's love wasn't love at all. It was management. My mother, Linda Ellis, believed control was care. My father, Harold, believed silence was wisdom. And my older brother, Ryan, well, he just believed he was better than me. For as long as I can remember, every choice I made came with their approval stamped on it. Or else it didn't count. My clothes, my friends, even my college major. Accounting is safe, Mom said when I'd wanted to study journalism. Writers starve. Numbers don't, so I listened. I always listened. Then came Caleb. He wasn't the kind of man my family wanted me to marry. He worked construction, drove a beat-up Chevy, and had this ridiculous habit of whistling while he worked. But he was kind. He made me laugh. He made me feel seen, something my family never did. When he proposed, it was in the most imperfectly perfect way. At a diner, over pancakes, his hands shaking as syrup dripped down his fingers. I said yes before he could even finish the question. For a while, I thought maybe love could outrun control. I was wrong. The morning after we announced the engagement, my mother called a family meeting. She sat at the head of the dining table like a CEO about to fire her least productive employee. Dad stayed quiet, as usual, and Ryan smirked from across the table. "Megan," she said, folding her hands, "we've thought about this, and we're not giving you a dime for this wedding." That wasn't the shock. The shock was the next sentence. "You're making a mistake, and we can't let you ruin your life." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was final. And something inside me broke just enough to let the truth slip through. I didn't argue. I just said one word, "Okay." They thought I surrendered. But that word, that single, quiet okay, was the beginning of everything. The week after that so-called family meeting, things went quiet. Too quiet. Mom acted like the conversation never happened. Dad buried himself in his crossword puzzles. And Ryan kept dropping little comments like, "You'll thank us someday." I tried to stay focused on what mattered. Caleb and I had found a small event hall on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We'd been saving every dollar we could, cutting corners wherever possible. He even joked, "We'll have the cheapest, happiest wedding in North Carolina." I remember laughing when he said that. I wish I could still laugh about it now. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Caleb sitting on my front steps, his face pale. "Megs," he said quietly, "I think there's been a mistake." He handed me his phone. It was an email from the venue. "We regret to inform you that your reservation has been canceled at the request of the bride. Refund processed in full." My heart sank. "What?" I whispered. "I didn't cancel anything." Caleb looked at me with that same hurt confusion. "They said you called personally." I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed the number listed. The woman who answered sounded hesitant. "Miss Ellis? We received your signed cancellation form. I'm sorry, but everything's been processed." "My what?" I nearly shouted. "I didn't sign anything." She hesitated again. "Well, the signature matches the contract, and the payment was refunded to the same account." That's when my stomach dropped. The payment hadn't come from my account. It had come from my parents. Caleb watched me as realization washed over my face. "They did this," I whispered. "My parents did this." He reached for my hand, his jaw tight. "Then we'll fix it." But I could barely hear him. I was already seeing the pattern. Every time I tried to make a choice they didn't approve of, they took it away. The next morning, I drove straight to my parents' house. Mom was trimming her roses when I pulled up. "Oh, Megan," she said with that brittle smile. "I was just about to call you. Why did you cancel my wedding?" I demanded. She didn't flinch. Sweetheart, she said calmly. I only did what any responsible parent would do. You're rushing into something you don't understand. You forged my signature, I snapped. Her expression didn't change. You'll thank me later. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stared at her and said softly, "No, Mom, you'll regret this." Then I turned around and walked away, not realizing yet just how deep her betrayal went. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Mom's calm voice in my head, that twisted version of love she used like a leash. You'll thank me later. No, not this time. At 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and started digging. I pulled up every email, every invoice, every contract connected to the wedding. Something didn't sit right. The cancellations, the refunds, the signature that wasn't mine. When I looked closer, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The refund from the venue didn't go back to our savings account. It went to one under my mother's name, a joint account she had opened years ago, supposedly for emergencies. My heart thudded. The next morning, I drove to the bank. The manager, a kind woman named Teresa, recognized me from town. "I just need to verify a few transactions," I said, my voice trembling. When she pulled up the records, her expression shifted. "Miss Ellis, these withdrawals are substantial." "How substantial?" "Over $40,000. I felt my breath hitch. $40,000. Our entire wedding fund. Gone. Teresa frowned. "There's something else. A transfer from a trust account under your name, one that's been active since you turned 18. "What trust account?" I whispered. She turned the screen toward me. My grandfather's name flashed at the top, Henry Ellis Trust for Megan Ellis. I stared at it, my heart hammering. My grandfather died when I was a kid, and I'd never known about any trust fund. According to the document, I was the beneficiary. But every withdrawal over the last 5 years had been made by my father's signature. It felt like the room tilted sideways. My whole body went cold. "They've been stealing from me," I murmured. I walked out of that bank like a ghost, gripping the folder of documents Teresa printed for me. Outside, the sun felt wrong, too bright for a world that had just caved in. When I got home, I called Caleb. He answered on the first ring. "Did you find out what happened?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. "They canceled our wedding to cover up theft. My parents have been using my money for years." He was silent for a long time before saying, "Megan, you can't let them get away with this." That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the trust documents spread across my kitchen table. Every signature, every date, all of it forged. They'd taken my wedding, my money, and my trust. But what they didn't know yet was that I still had something left. Proof. And I was going to use it. I always thought revenge was loud. Screaming matches, broken plates, dramatic exits. Turns out, real revenge is silent. It looks like patience, planning, and smiling when they think they've won. The morning after discovering the trust documents, I stopped by a small law firm downtown. A friend from college, Hannah Torres, worked there as a paralegal. She'd always been the no-nonsense type, the kind of woman who didn't flinch when life got ugly. When I told her what my family had done, she didn't gasp or say, "Oh my God." She just leaned back in her chair and said, "You still have the files?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "Then you're going to need 2 things, a recorder and a reason to see them again." So I made one. That weekend, I called my mom and said I wanted to clear the air. Her tone softened immediately. "I'm glad you're finally being reasonable," she said. Reasonable. If only she knew. When I arrived at their house, the same house I grew up in, everything felt smaller, like the walls themselves knew what they'd done. I slipped the tiny recorder inside my jacket pocket and hit the button. Mom met me at the kitchen table, her hair perfect, pearls glinting in the morning sun. Dad was there too, pretending to read the paper. Ryan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So," Mom began, "have you finally realized we were right about Caleb?" I smiled just enough to look defeated. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think you were right." Her whole face brightened. "Oh, sweetheart, I knew you'd see." Reason I let her talk and about how Caleb wasn't good enough, how marriage changes, everything, how parents know best. She didn't realize that every word she said was being recorded. Then, I asked the question I came for. "Mom, what did you do with the wedding money?" For a split second, she froze. Then she laughed, light and dismissive. "Oh, Megan, you know we used it responsibly. We moved it around a bit. There were some bills, some debts. Nothing major? And the trust fund?" I asked quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Who told you about that?" Dad looked up from his paper, his voice tight. "We only borrowed it, Meg. You don't understand how finances work." I leaned back, pretending to sigh. "You're right, Dad. I don't." Inside, though, I was smiling, because now I had everything I needed. Their own words, their own voices. That night, I sent the recording and all the bank documents to Hannah. Her reply came within minutes. "Megan, this isn't just fraud. It's felony level. We're going to take them down, carefully." And that's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for me. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, like a place where truth had to be dragged out kicking and screaming. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Hannah's boss, Attorney James Rowe. He was sharp, calm, and the kind of man who didn't waste words. Across from us sat my parents and my brother. Mom wore a navy dress and that same pearl necklace she'd always put on when she wanted to look respectable. Dad kept adjusting his tie, avoiding my eyes. And Ryan just looked irritated, like this whole thing was an inconvenience. When the judge called my name, the sound echoed in my chest. Case 19-472, Ellis versus Ellis. Hearing my last name twice like that, once for them, once for me, hit harder than I expected. James stood, his voice steady. "Your Honor, this case involves fraudulent signatures, embezzlement from a trust, and identity theft committed by the plaintiff's immediate family." Mom's lawyer objected, claiming family misunderstandings shouldn't be criminalized. The judge frowned. "Forgery and financial theft are not misunderstandings, counselor." Then came the recordings. James played the clip from our kitchen conversation, my mother's laughter echoing through the courtroom. "Oh, Megan, you know we used it responsibly. We moved it around a bit. There were some bills, some debts. Nothing major." The room went silent. Mom's face drained of color. Dad looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Then the bank statements came out, each one signed in my father's handwriting. Every loan, every transfer, every dollar that wasn't theirs. Finally, the trust records. Roe turned toward my parents. "You both withdrew funds from a restricted account meant solely for your daughter. You forged her signature on a wedding cancellation to conceal it. Is that correct?" Mom's voice cracked. "We only wanted to protect her. That man was beneath her." I met her gaze, calm, steady. "You didn't protect me. You erased me?" Ryan stood suddenly, his voice sharp. "You're just doing this for attention. You always needed to make yourself the victim." The judge's gavel came down. Order. By the time the testimony ended, there was no story left for them to twist. Every signature, every transaction, every lie laid bare. When the verdict came, it was clean and final. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. All funds are to be returned immediately, plus an additional $75,000 in damages for fraud and emotional distress. Mom gasped. Dad's shoulders slumped. Ryan muttered something under his breath. Me? I just exhaled. Not with victory, with relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't their project. I was free. The day after the verdict, I drove past my parents' house one last time. The roses Mom used to brag about were overgrown, the shutters faded, and for the first time, the place didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum of control. Every wall, every window, built on silence and guilt. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. A week later, I moved into a small apartment overlooking the harbor in Wilmington. It wasn't fancy, but the morning light hit the windows in this soft golden way that made everything feel possible again. I unpacked the last box, set my sketchpad on the desk, and smiled. Yeah, sketchpad. Because the one thing my family never let me do, the thing I'd buried for years, was draw. I'd forgotten how much I loved it until I started again, one pencil line at a time. I wasn't an accountant anymore. I was building something new, a design line, small and honest, built from the pieces they tried to destroy. Caleb came by sometimes, helping me paint the walls or fix the wobbly shelves. We weren't rushing back into anything. Too much had changed, and we both needed to heal. But when he smiled at me, it didn't feel like the beginning of a romance. It felt like peace. One evening, I was sketching by the window when my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. Then again. Then a third time. Finally, a voicemail. Her voice sounded small, not the sharp, commanding woman who used to decide my life for me. Your father lost his job, she said quietly. Ryan's moved back home. We could use your help. I stared at the screen for a long time, the same way you'd look at a letter from someone long dead. I didn't feel anger, just a deep, calm understanding. I typed one text, just one line. You taught me to stand on my own. I'm finally doing it. Then I set the phone down and went back to my sketches. Outside, the waves hit the dock, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. For the first time in my life, there was no noise, no orders, no guilt, no pretending. Just the hum of my own freedom. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on some music, and whispered to the empty room, they called it rebellion. I call it living. And as the ocean breeze drifted through the open window, I smiled, because peace, it turned out, was the sweetest revenge of all.